Hello and welcome everyone watching. Welcome to our morning chat. I'm Penny and I'm here with the wonderful Dr. Kristann Heinz. And today we're going to be talking about understanding elimination diets. Now, if anyone's watching this through my own pages, you will know that I've been causing quite a stir talking about the fact that I am about to I'm preparing for. I'd dived in head first, wasn't very wise, but I'm preparing my body for an elimination diet because of the fact that I felt like and feel like I have kind of lost the ability to manage ADHD successfully as I have been for years. And I know that food is always, the answer. And when I look at the things I've been eating, I can see why it's all gone a bit up in the air. So I knew I needed something to follow. And so the best person I could think of to talk about this was Dr. Kristann, because she is just incredible when it comes to all things nutrition and health, and I'm really excited about an elimination diet that she does too. So we'll get into that after, but we're going to just go into it and talk about what an elimination diet is and why it is so beneficial no matter who you are, give or take. So Kristann, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself and just thank you in advance for all of the goodness you're about to share.
Oh, thank you, Penny. I am so excited to be here. I think we connected on this very soon after our introduction to each other. And I remember you talking to me about a moment in time when you had taken on plant-based eating and had kind of moved over into vegetarian, vegan lifestyle, and how it was so profound for your experience in terms of your ability to focus and kind of manage your ADHD in a way that was more natural. And to me, when I heard that, that is music to my ears. This is one of the most important tools that I use in my practice. And your experience, although, incredibly significant and important to you, is not uncommon from all of my other patients who go through something like this, because this is such a profound experiment that you can do for your body and yourself. What we eat absolutely changes our physiology in our body. And when we change the surrounding environment that all of our reactions and all of our cellular processes happen within and give our body the nutrients it needs, it is amazing how many things start to fall away that we experience as what we call symptoms. So I am so excited to spend this time with you and go more into detail about why your experiment previously was so successful and why this is such an amazing tool for people.
Thank you.
All right. So that being said, today we're here for educational purposes only to kind of discuss the importance of an elimination diet. And if this is something that your audience is really interested in, I would encourage everybody to reach out to, a trusted provider to decide figure out if this is the right way for you to move forward with how to address your issues. It's just my caveat. All right, so let's get into it. What is an elimination diet? So an elimination diet is the way that we determine if somebody is having food sensitivities by removing hidden food allergies. So what does that mean? Because people will be like, oh, I don't have any allergies. I don't have any. And so when we think about an allergy, right, we're thinking about somebody who needs an EpiPen, who may have to go to the emergency room, who, we think about it in terms of people who might have peanuts, right? We hear peanuts, we hear nuts. Yeah. And so those are medical emergencies that need to be addressed in urgent care, emergency room situations. When we are eliminating foods for food sensitivities, that is where the food causes a low-level inflammation or inflammatory process in your body. And that can result in symptoms that are not urgent enough to take you to the emergency room, but are things that you chronically are dealing with. So brain fog, bloating, itchy skin. It can flare an autoimmune process. It can trigger joint pain. It can cause these kind of low level symptoms that people are managing day in and day out. And so by removing the foods that potentially are causing this level of inflammation, we see those symptoms improve. So this is the tool we use to determine if you are somebody who has some level of food sensitivity. And this allows us to identify what food that may be. So this is the gold standard of how to do that. And so we're going to go through that a little bit more. So the reason why I find this to be one of the most important things that we are able to use in clinical practice, and one of the most empowering experiences that people can have in terms of their own health, is that we all have this ability to manage a certain amount of toxic load. And when I say toxic load, I'm talking about exposures, environmental toxins, stress, toxic relationships, pathogens. So, viruses, bacteria, fungus, yeast, we carry all these things within us. And we are always being exposed chronically to toxins in our environment. And when we reach a certain level of toxic exposure where we're not able to clear those things from our body, and they cause undue stress on our physical body, we will see kind of like an overspill. And that's why I use the reference of a sink or a bucket. So you have a certain amount of reserve that you can have some level of tolerance for. And once you reach that level of tolerance, then your bucket is going to overflow, your sink will overflow. And that overflowing is represented in symptoms. So what we try to do is, by taking away these potential foods that could be triggering inflammation, is that we try to lessen your burden. And when we lessen your burden, we have an ability to see what is the true issue, like what's really going on beneath or underneath the symptoms that you're experiencing. So those symptoms may totally disappear during a process like this, or things become more clear in terms of what we are able to understand about your overall health and where you are in your wellness right now. So this
must be quite, where a lot of people experience symptoms later on in life. It could that be then because their body has been able to fight things off up until that point, and now they're full to the brim?
Yeah.
Or
yes, it's exactly it. And it's like, I was fine until, right? I had no symptoms until. So we hear that all the time. I was fine until I got the flu, and then I never recovered. I was fine until I had this exposure of this moldy house, and then I never recovered. Before, you may have had more reserve or capacity to manage that and recover. But there becomes a point where the toxic burden or the toxic load is so much that we can't manage that physiologically. And so the idea is that we try to create more space for you to navigate these things better. And that is kind of represented here in terms of the pink bucket can represent our capacity for reserve. And we know this in everyday experiences, i.e., oh, I didn't get that much sleep last night, I don't have a lot of bandwidth. That is the same thing that we're talking about, but we're just talking about a physiologic experience, not an emotional experience, right? So I know that if I don't get a lot of sleep, I'm going to have less capacity to be patient. I may feel more stressed during my day. I may feel like I don't successfully know how to navigate a situation like I would if I had more sleep. So this is the same thing. We're just talking about a different kind of level of experience. So we have that concept of tolerance in our everyday exposures. And then we have the concept of loss of tolerance. And then we will get these experience symptoms. And it can be, this is a very small list of all the symptoms, obviously, that people can experience, but this covers a lot of them. And the way that we create more tolerance in our everyday life are all the things that we know about health and wellness, right? We talk about this all the time: exercise, meditation, taking healthful supplements, doing lymphatic support, immune support, caring relationships, and then an individual healthful diet. And this is where doing an elimination diet can help you maximize and understand for yourself what is the best diet for me and for my body to function, so that I create more tolerance in my system. So, does that resonate at all with any of your experiences that you've had so far?
100%. 100%. And also, like, just even thinking about the fact that even when I went through like a big change, like moving house at one point, and my routine changed, and I felt like I weren't a morning person as much. And so I weren't working out. Again, that added to it. Yeah. And I was trying to like incorporate exercise in different ways, but not as a thing that I did every day. And it weren't like being obsessed with it, but I just knew I felt better when I did. And I didn't actually know why. I was like, maybe it's because I've got loads of energy and it just releases the energy, which is a point. But also it was the fact that I sweat quick and I needed to detoxify. So this is speaking to me personally loud. And I know a lot of people who struggle with different things. And I say I know a lot of people because I do get messages and have conversations with people about this. So I'm not generalizing, but especially with a lot of people I know that have been recently diagnosed with things that affect them mentally or affect their mood, like ADHD, depression, bipolar and stuff. And I've been in this space too. So I actually, whilst I'm not in it at the moment, I can feel the feeling behind it when someone brings it up to me. It's like when someone says, oh, you just need to change what you eat and exercise more and you know, meditate and take supplements. It's like, I've just figured out what's wrong with me. I've just figured out that the struggles I'm having are common, and I'm not just turning into the worst person in the world. I can't now take on 20 new habits. I just need to sit with this for a minute. I just need some medication. I just need someone to see me and hear me. And I hear that and I get that. And so whilst seeing lists can make people think, so I've got to do all of that before I feel okay, you know, and it's not. The point in us having this conversation today is because this elimination diet is a great place to start.
A great place to start. Yeah.
And I think it's important to say that because yes, I am a person who my morning routine became something I was obsessed with because it made my day. But it started with me trying different things. Like I knew that affirmations made me feel empowered. I knew that listening to uplifting podcasts really affected my mood. And so whilst I now have a 2-hour morning routine where I incorporate all of these things, and if I don't do it, I'm like, But I didn't wake up one day and do that. It was finding all of these different things that I enjoyed that made me feel better, and knowing if I started my day with these things, maybe I would have good days every day, you know? And so it just took years for me to get to that point. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that for anyone thinking, oh, this list, I don't do any of that. Where do I start? This whole talk is the reason where you start. This is why we're doing it.
This is why we're doing. And I also want to empower people to realize that, you know, they may be doing things on this list already.
Yeah.
Right. That being in a caring relationship or being in a wonderful work environment, those things help you. You're already doing that.
Yeah.
And just to speak to the importance of the diet, I mean, just a quick diversion, but I will tell you, I did my first elimination diet when I was maybe a second year resident, and I was living about an hour away from the hospital, and I had a small child at home. And the amount of stress that I felt during that period of my time was so extreme. I was getting panic attacks driving on the highway to go to work. And it was incapacitating. My anxiety was, you know, just kind of pervasive thoughts and like looping around, and I couldn't kind of shake myself out of it. I'd start kind of like this emotional mindset spinning. And I just felt like I didn't know where the wiggle room was for that. And I saw this chiropractor for some hip pain that I had been having because I was driving so much and I was sitting in the car all the time. And he said to me after his full evaluation, he said, I really think that you would benefit from an elimination diet. And I was like, an elimination diet? Like, what's that? Like, that seems really...
The word diet just throws people up as well, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, well, you know, if you really, and my blood pressure was elevated slightly. And, you know, there was a lot of stuff where he was pointing out to me, you're in a really sympathetically charged state. You're in a real state of fight or flight. And so I really liked him. And I said, okay, I will do it, but I'm not going to give up my morning cup of black tea. I was very adamant about that. There was like this incredible emotional connection to it. And he could realize that like me, even just thinking about doing whatever I was doing, he was like, okay, that's fine, but you can't have any dairy, you know, we'll give you that one thing.
And what is the tea, the caffeine then?
The caffeine. Yes. Yeah. I was like, there's no way. I mean, I was getting up at 4:30 and getting to the hospital by like 5:30. There was no way.
Tea isn't even intense caffeine. So
yeah, I guess it's half of what a normal cup of coffee is. Right. So anyway, he was sweet enough to kind of allow me that flexibility, recognizing it was more of an emotional thing. Now I realize it was more of emotional than it was actually physical. But, you know, we learn about ourselves as we evolve through these things, which I think is such an amazing process. Taking things out of your diet and food is so emotional that we can learn so much about ourselves in terms of, why is this such a trigger? Why do I need to have this? What's deeper? What am I looking for? What am I longing for that this is replacing? Yeah. So it really opens up a whole other conversation that we could talk about on a whole nother, you know, morning chat with Penny. So,
you know,
but anyway, so I went ahead and I did an elimination diet similar to what I have led, you know, hundreds of people through and what you're, you know, considering doing. And I will tell you, my anxiety just like came right down. Wow. Came right down. Yeah. And then during the reintroduction phase of the elimination diet, where we isolate each individual food, you know, item, what I realized was gluten was that trigger for me. And every time I had gluten, if my anxiety just kind of revved up. And so that makes a lot of sense. You know, gluten created a lot of inflammation in my body. That inflammation crossed the blood-brain barrier. That triggered brain feelings and symptoms, right, of anxiety. And it can for other people, depression, brain fog, lack of focus. Those are all really real things that can happen from gluten sensitivity, not like gluten allergy, celiac disease. People will be like, well, I don't have celiac. Okay, that doesn't mean that you don't have a sensitivity. And all I can say is that was a turnaround at that point. I thought, this is so powerful. And having worked in nutrition and in the dietary field for, you know, since I was 21, I had never come across this. I'd never come across this. This was totally new information to me to look at food like this.
Yeah. Wow.
So, and since that time, I probably have done an elimination diet, I don't know, you know, maybe 10 times, leading people through it, redefining it. And now we're going to talk about how powerful this approach is, because like you said, diet is kind of a word that turns people off, but I really see this as an experiment for everybody, for yourself, for understanding what is your best place to be in terms of how diet can help you.
Yeah.
So that just kind of explains, you know, certainly like at that period, my bucket was certainly overflowing. So, yeah. All right. And this again is just another way of visualizing what we're talking about, which is that we have what's called physiologic interference, where we kind of can't get to the building to fix the building when there's so much other stuff in the way. So this is, if the brambles and things like that represent kind of inflammation or burden that's being driven by food sensitivities, we can't even get to the building until we remove that burden to be able to see what lies underneath. And that is why I use this as a primary step in many patients in my practice. And often after they do something like this, the list of concerns has been reduced to maybe 3 things instead of 10 things. Yeah. And that gives us much more capacity to target, where do we go from here? How do we continue to support your wellness?
Yeah.
So that is why it is such a huge tool for me.
I know this might come up after, but what you said earlier, it's just speaks so clear to me about the emotional side of certain things. I've done fasts before where I was like fasting caffeine, like, Lent and stuff like that, and like just cutting certain things out and just challenging myself. And all, I did a Daniel fast, which was like food, veg and whole grain, no caffeine. And I also felt that emotional, it was before I actually got diagnosed with ADHD that I first cut everything out. And I realized I'd never felt better in my life. I didn't need coffee anymore. Water felt like coffee. I was saying to my friends, when I drink a glass of water, I feel like I've had a glass of coffee. I didn't understand what was going on. I was just doing this fast, just 21-day fast. It was then when I got diagnosed with ADHD, I knew the impact food would have. And so I did it again. I just went vegan. But what I'm getting at, I'm kind of going into two questions in one here, but the first one is, I really appreciated you mentioning that emotional side, because the fear, even like what I mentioned to you earlier on a different topic, but even as someone who socially smoked when I was in my, 20s and stuff, and I used to sit and think, I don't do this every day. I don't necessarily love it, but how would I get through that uncomfortable situation if I didn't? Like, it's just these lies that you believe. And I then adopted, when I stopped smoking, the same attitude for chocolate. Like, okay, I do want to be healthy. I know that refined sugar is bad for me. I know it's bad for me specifically because I know how I feel the next day. I know how I feel when I don't feel comfortable in my body. It affects my entire being. Not everyone's like that, but I am. So I know I have to cut this out. But when it gets to about 6 o'clock at night and I start feeling tired and I start feeling like I want to be cozy, I don't care. It's and I used to think, how will I ever do another elimination diet when I don't have emotional control in the evening sometimes? And it's usually evening for me, or I don't care as much. Like in the morning or on a Monday, I'm like, I need to do this because it's right for me. And on an evening where I'm getting a bit moody or, losing energy and wish I wasn't, all of a sudden, I don't mind that I'm going to eat chocolate. It doesn't feel as important. So I guess my question, with my appreciation for you sharing that aside with the emotional, is, and maybe this might be at the end of the slides, we answer it, or if you can now, is for people that feel like that. And I know people with ADHD or who have symptoms that align with the ADHD diagnosis, which include being inconsistent, lack of consistency, not being able to focus, getting bored of things and needing quick fixes,
stimulation, things like that.
Stimulation and dopamine rushes. I know I coach a lot of people who say, I want to do that, but I don't want to feel crap about myself when it gets to day 3 and I can't continue, so I just don't do it. And it's that preventing yourself from feeling the low, because you've the low self-esteem, because no matter what, you don't practice it. No matter how much exercise every day will change your life, even 15 minutes a day, you don't stick to it. So you kind of have this kind of alter ego that feels like your own worst enemy, but it's also you. And so I just wondered if you had, no pressure, of course, now I've landed so much pressure on you, but encouragement for people that feel like that and that feel like it's a bit daunting because they know what they're like.
Yeah. So I have 2 ways that I look at that information and that approach. One of them is, most people know what is healthful for them in terms of their wellness and what is not. Most people, if you asked anybody on the street, they'd say, yeah, no, I know if I eat more vegetables, if I exercise, if I meditate, if I drink, the appropriate amount of water, I know all of those things. So there's, like you said, there's this idea of knowing, and then there's the idea of putting things into place and being able to follow through with that. And there's a whole bunch of creatures that we live within our body, right? In our gut has its own microsystem, this ecosystem of different bacteria, of fungus, of yeast, and they all kind of coexist there. Those bugs can also send us messages that will encourage and create a sense of craving. And anyone who's ever cut sugar out of their diet or done anything where they're cutting a lot of carbohydrates out of their diet will know that they go through a period where they have this enormous increase of cravings. And then if they can work their way through those, right, there's a lot of craving that comes when those bugs change in our diet, in our gut, and when there's die off. And once we can work our way through that, all of a sudden our cravings will go down. So there's a biologic piece to what you're talking about. Yeah. There's also a brain piece to what you're talking about, which is that there is a part of the brain that helps us stay committed to the decisions that we've made. And as the day goes on, that part of our brain becomes, there's less and less capacity of that. So there is definitely kind of a wiring issue that has to take place. And there are some really, really amazing kind of neurobiologists that study this. And one woman in particular who I love, Susan Thompson Pierce, wrote a book called Bright Line Eating, where she talks about the brain pathways and the changing in the brain as we do different diets and diet programs. And her suggestion is the way that we do not allow our brain to kind of fall back into that capacity of, it doesn't matter, I don't have the willpower, I don't have the resistance. It's not really that. It's really that part of the brain gets tired. And we're also have made a million decisions at that point, right? So this is the whole concept about like when people talk about someone wearing the same uniform every day. Okay, it just takes some level of decision making out of your day. So now your brain is liberated to like do these other things. So her suggestion is that you plan out what you're going to eat that day. So it's a non-negotiable. It's something you don't have to worry about. And we talk about that with the elimination diet too, which is that if we can prepare foods, if we can write out for the week, you know, what am I going to, in general, like, what am I going to do? And I know some people are like, I don't want to get that intense about it. And that's fine. But I do think that planning for the week takes some of the burden out of you having to make that decision when you're in a place where you don't have that reserve. You know, physiologically, this is not an issue of willpower. It's not an issue of somebody not wanting to do it. This is just a physiologic situation that we're talking about. And so that as we change and we start eating, you know, healthier foods or different foods, or we're trying to learn what the ideal, you know, food diet is for us personally, then our brain changes and we start to know. So I wouldn't reach for gluten now because I know the way I'm going to feel. And my brain is so locked into that understanding that no amount of like wearing me down is going to lead me to that place. Because it's so kind of like settled in my neural pathways.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I was like that with sugar before. That's how I know it's possible, is before when I cut everything out and I felt so good, I was like, well, I'm not introducing anything back because I don't want to lose this feeling. And whilst I did introduce meat slowly, and you know, I've never drank animal milk since. So even now, I haven't willingly drank animal milk for years. And yes, the sugar, I was easy. I was like, nah, don't want that. I'll have something savory.
Yeah, so and that represents two things, right? Again, that represents the bacteria in your gut changing. So the yeast changing, the different bacteria that craves carbohydrates and sugar, they need that to live. Everyone's just trying to survive, right? Yeah. So that represents a change in your biome. And it also represents change in your brain. And it represents a learning that's taken place between understanding that you feel better when you don't do it. So you also don't have that neural network laid down that is, you know, driving you to do it, to you do get the dopamine hit from the sugar. So it kind of goes into looking at some of the addiction pathways when we talk about that. And just to know that those things will change, like your brain will change and it will be different than it is.
So encouraging. And I'm so glad I asked. I was like, don't butt in.
No, please, we're just trying to flush out
I know,
anything
and I
people
know
would,
that.
have questions about, because I don't want this to be scary for people. I don't want people to think, oh, I can't do this, or this is too much for me. And even if it's doing one or two things, like I'm going to cut out, sugar certainly can, put you on a roller coaster ride. I really empower people to try to, maintain and regulate their blood sugar, because that affects your brain so much. Even if you start with those types of steps, right? Sometimes people aren't in a place where they can even have the reserve to do something like this. And so I'll say, okay, instead of taking out, let's add in these things. And I think I have a slide next. Let me just see if
let's roll. Let's carry on. It seems like perfect timing.
This is perfect. So, what I might say to somebody is, let's add in this. Let's just load this up, right? And we may find through the process of loading this up that you start to feel like you have a little bit more of a lift. And then we can talk about, what are we going to eliminate? What are we going to take away? But these are all foods that, I would consider anti-inflammatory, that generally provide a tremendous amount of nutrition and blood sugar stability, and in general are, fully enjoyed on a process like this when we go through something like this for 3 weeks.
With the teas, now I am a very keen tea drinker. Not because I'm British, I'm actually talking about herbal tea. This is probably actually an obvious question, because you mentioned black tea. So, there's like green teas and stuff that have caffeine. They need to be eliminated as well because of the caffeine, even though it's low.
So I feel two ways about this. Sometimes if somebody is really locked into caffeine, and maybe this is a good time to just chat about caffeine for a quick second, right? So caffeine is something that we all know as a stimulant. And, there's a lot of information out there, like caffeine's good for you, caffeine's bad for you. Like, where does the science lie on caffeine? And I think it depends on the individual person. Again, I always go back to that. I don't care what the studies say. I don't care like what the leading like thoughts are around some of the nuances of a healthy diet. I really feel like this comes down to personal, your personal experience in your body with what works well for you. And so I do encourage people to try to eliminate caffeine for the period that we are doing the anti-inflammatory diet, if possible, because it's an adrenal tax. So you drink caffeine, and in response, you get a big burst of cortisol, which is a hormone that is a stress hormone. And in response to that, you will get other hormones that increase, that will determine and help to stabilize, so you get an increase in insulin, which decreases your blood glucose. So it contributes to a blood sugar up and down type of an experience, as well as that stress response. So for some people, they're very sensitive to caffeine, and it will create that increased stress in their nervous system. It will decrease their capacity to sleep. We have a 24-hour cycle of caffeine. So by the time, if you have caffeine in the morning, so let's say you have a cup of coffee, which is about 160 to 180 milligrams of caffeine. By 12 hours later, you're going to have half of that caffeine still in your system. So you're going to have basically what is the same as a cup of black tea in your system by 7 p.m. That's just with one cup of coffee. That, for some people, can influence their capacity to go to sleep, right? Because it can be a stimulant. It can interfere with their ability to sleep deeply. So I really encourage people to try to back off of that. So if you, so even a cup of black tea, right? So we're talking 60, 80 milligrams. By the time we get to 7 at night, we're talking, 30, 40 milligrams. That's equivalent to a cup of green tea, right? Green tea, if we start in the morning, by the time we end, we're talking like 15 milligrams of caffeine, which is not really that much caffeine, right? We get like 5 milligrams of caffeine from chocolate. So that kind of puts it into perspective. If somebody really is struggling, I think you can have some green tea. I think that's fine. Some people really need the caffeine from particularly those that are, experiencing some of the ADHD type symptoms, that a little bit of caffeine actually helps with their focus. So, doing either cutting from coffee back down to black tea and or black tea down to green tea and or, no caffeine, this would be an opportunity to play around with that. So all of this is, as I say to people who come and that I work with, this is the ideal, but that doesn't mean that you are not going to get benefits from adding these foods or taking away any of the trigger foods.
Yeah.
You're going to see something. The reason why, and I'll move on to the next slide, the reason why we encourage this level of elimination in terms of getting these things out of your diet is because if you have multiple sensitivities, and I'm going to use my tack analogy, if you have 10 tacks in the bottom of your foot and I tell you to take out one, right? If I ask you to take out dairy, but you actually have a sensitivity to wheat, dairy, corn, soy, eggs, and so on, you're still not going to feel great. So we're really trying to wipe the slate clean is what we're trying to do for that period of time.
Wait, on the last slide, can you just go back just for 1 second or 5 seconds? I can't see fish or chicken or white meat on here, but on the next slide, only red meat's mentioned as an elimination.
Oh, so this is when we are, it depends on what kind of an elimination diet you're doing, right? So if you're doing plant-based, then obviously you're not going to be having any animal meats or animal meat products. If you were doing a inclusive kind of omnivore elimination diet, then you would be allowed to have fish and white meats.
Okay, that's good to know. But no red meat, egg, and dairy, no matter which one you're doing.
No matter which one you're doing. No matter which. People have a lot of difficulty digesting red meat. And so that can be one of the things that we just want to experience and see if that's something that's true for you.
I feel like I'm being shouted at with peanut butter being so blunt and in the middle there on its own, because it is one of my favorite things in the world. And I just don't understand why it's being singled out like that.
Why is it getting why there's so much heat going?
Why not almond butter? Why not butter on its own?
Peanuts in general have been associated with a lot of mold. There's a particular toxin called aflatoxins that have been associated with peanut butter. And so I think in general, this is also kind of, and maybe this is a reflection of time. This is kind of your standard 6 that have been used. The first, the top one, the wheat and gluten, dairy, corn, soy, eggs, peanut butter I kind of put those in kind of the top 6 issues. Maybe historically, just because so many people had sensitivities to peanuts, I think that people have sensitivity to mold in peanuts. That's probably what is driving some of the reactivity. If we were to do a more intensive anti-inflammatory diet, if we were to do something like there are other spectrum of elimination diets out there, they would take out nuts, right? They would allow seeds, but they probably would take out nuts, including almonds, walnuts, things like that. I tend to do this basic one because I feel like asking people to do this is enough, and from when we get the information back from the reintroduction phase, if we haven't gotten to the place that we want out of the elimination diet, then we can readjust it. We can kind of, if somebody comes in and they have a lot of autoimmune disorders, and that's the primary symptom that they're really trying to work on, then we may consider like a more intensive elimination diet that's more in the anti-inflammatory vein of an elimination diet that takes out nuts. But for our purposes for this, I tend to just start here. Like we could really go all out, right? And the ultimate kind of elimination diet where you've taken out everything, if you look on the spectrum of diets, is probably the carnivore diet, where people they eliminate everything except for meat, so that's kind of a really extreme version of an elimination diet. And then we have kind of a spectrum, right? Then we go to keto, then we go to maybe whole foods, the whole 30, that doesn't allow beans. Then we maybe drop down to this one. And then we kind of work our way down on the spectrum. this seems reasonable. And this seems to me like we're still allowing healthful foods that most people tolerate. And this can be adjusted individually, for anybody, obviously.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
I'm glad you pointed that out, though. I'll make a note of that slide. So when we do an elimination diet, there are a couple of phases that I like to talk about. I like to talk about this kind of induction phase. Actually, we're missing the initial phase, which would be the prep phase, right? Which might be that like week or two, that contemplative phase where you're like, am I going to do it? Am I not going to do it? Where's my shopping list? Let me get myself organized. Let me start cutting back on things like caffeine. Let me start kind of dipping my toe in to see how I do. And so we could have had that preparatory phase as our phase one, but the actual part of the elimination diet piece of it is, so the first 2 days you can actually do an induction phase. So sometimes I'll encourage people to do this if they've maybe done an elimination diet before. This phase increases detox capacity because you're really unburdening the digestive system, because we're encouraging kind of the first 2 days can be liquids only. So this is the idea of doing when people do juice fasts or things like that. That's what they're trying to do, is that they're trying to unburden the system so that your detox capacities can like kick up a notch. This is always optional. So if somebody doesn't feel like they have the capacity or the bandwidth to do this, then we don't do that. We skip that. In my kind of liquid induction phase, I really encourage smoothies and soups. So you can add anything you want into that smoothie. You can add in protein powders, you can add in nutritionals, and the same goes for the soups. The only criteria about it is that it's liquid. That just decreases the digestive burden. It increases your ability to detox, but this is not a calorie restricted day. These are not, you can have as much of this as you want. And so if you have, any medical issues, we always encourage people to avoid this step. Just jump into the regular eating, the anti-inflammatory eating. So again, that's optional and you'll see that in certain diets, out there, where they will just do liquids. And that's one of the reasons why. Then we began the 3 weeks of just eliminating all those anti-inflammatory foods. And I do want to say one caveat about joint pain. So we do take out nightshades for people who have joint pain, and nightshades are a group of vegetables that have a chemical in it called solanine, a compound called solanine. And solanine has to be detoxed by everybody individually, but it can build up in certain people. And that can be the reason why their joint pain can be exacerbated, is because of that potential compound that's in those vegetables. So if someone if joint pain's on that list of things that they're struggling with, I encourage them to take out nightshades as well. This does not go over so well in the summer when people have their gardens full of tomatoes. They're like, what do I do with all my tomatoes in my harvest? Can it? Freeze it?
Make ketchup.
So after you do this 3-week phase, then we reintroduce each food one at a time. So often, you may have heard or had friends who say like, oh, I went on this detox diet, or I went on this like amazing cleanse diet, and I felt, well, how'd you feel? I felt great. Well, do you know what foods were your triggers? No. So this piece is actually the most important part. And I look at this like, kind of Christmas morning, or like, kind of that excitement that you get like your first day of school, or like something like that, where it's when you reintroduce foods, it gives you the power to know what food is your trigger. And then you can make decisions based around that information. So this is a phase that this is my most favorite phase, because I feel like it gives people so much information. And this is what we use to basically move forward for the next phase of their kind of dietary approach for lifetime of development of what is their best, how do they feel their best self? That's really what this information is geared towards giving people, is the empowerment to know how they can connect to themselves and feel the best.
Yeah. And where it says here that you reintroduce each food item one at a time every 3 days. So would that be eating gluten for 3 days?
So
And then
what you would do at that time is that we would take one day and you would eat gluten 3 times that day.
okay.
After that period of exposure, you would not eat it for the next couple days. And you would monitor your symptoms. Some people will, eat, let's say, eggs and then get a stomach ache. And then they'll know that a lot of their abdominal discomfort has come from eggs. You don't need to eat that 3 times a day.
You know straight away.
You know straight away. You don't need to eat something like sugar 3 times a day. You're going to feel pretty quickly how you respond to sugar.
Yeah. Exactly.
But it's really, and when we do this, we really have to be clear. It's not like you're going to go out and eat pizza, because pizza's got gluten, dairy, and it's got tomatoes. And it's got sometimes like the corn on the bottom, right? That keeps it from sticking to the pan. That's like 4 things. So we can't eat that as a reintroduction food. It has to be really isolated. So it has to be like, okay, I'm going to have scrambled eggs. I'm going to have I'm going to have an omelet. I'm going to have, you're just basically loading your body with that exposure.
Yeah.
To see how your immune system reacts.
And then, as you mentioned before, you do the whole figuring out what your future's going to be like.
And then you figure out what your future's going to be, which is amazing, because that gives you the power to kind of say, wow, I didn't realize I was that reactive to, let's use gluten, for example. So if you are having significant reactivities to different foods, my recommendation is always take that food out for 3 months. Give yourself the opportunity to let that inflammatory response kind of cool down. And then you will have, in that time frame where you have decreased the inflammation, you will actually be healing. You'll be healing your gut. You'll be healing your immune system. You will be re-regulating, rebalancing your immune system. So there's the possibility that in the future, you will be able to reintroduce this food and not have that same response.
Yeah.
So that's the goal. The goal is to heal to the point where we have tolerance, we have some level of tolerance to all foods.
Yeah. And we can hear what our body's saying to us.
Exactly. Yeah. And then it becomes clearer. It becomes clearer.
What about if somebody is in the day 3 to 21 and on day 16, they eat something that is not part of, one of the, basically they mess up for a day. I don't like the word mess up, but you know what I mean.
Well, they have some level of exposure. Like they try to be as mindful as they can, but sometimes there is that experience where someone is out to eat at a restaurant, they're making, best choices, and, the salad dressing has gluten and they didn't realize that. It's kind of after the fact.
Exactly.
And or, a decision of, okay, this is so-and-so's birthday party and I'm going to choose to eat this
little bit of cake.
So in that situation, what I would say is, first off, note what happened, right? So note, did you feel bad? Did you feel good? Like, did you notice anything or not? I would always encourage someone to get back to their baseline. So if they were feeling really great while they were on the, in that 3 weeks of elimination, and they had the piece of cake, and then the next day they woke up and they felt like they had run a marathon and they had increased brain fog, and, they felt really tired, or whatever the symptom may be, that they get back to baseline. So just continue to it's all information.
Start again. Yeah. Just carry on. You don't have to start back from the beginning.
Yeah. You don't need to.
Will you still class yourself as being on day 16, or the next day, would you be back on day 1?
Well, technically, if we were going to talk to, if we were going to look at it from an immune standpoint, you would technically be back on day 1.
Yeah.
However, every case is different. And so if you can get back to your baseline where you are feeling as good as you were before, that's a sign to me that your inflammation level has come down.
Brilliant. Good to know.
So
yeah.
It depends. Now, often people feel so good, like you said before, they don't want to introduce everything.
Yeah.
And I encourage them. I say, look, this is your opportunity to really lean in and discover for yourself, what are your trigger foods? So I encourage you to try it, so for yourself what you're going to eliminate out, and you can always come back here. You can always come back to this, and you can feel this feeling again by, reinstituting some of these principles.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what do people expect? I think we've talked about this, a little bit. We talked about the period of adjustment, and we've talked about kind of changing in your biome. We talked about cravings, and, your body will go through a period of detoxification. There's just, that's usually the first couple days of doing the elimination phase. These things will pass. You can feel fatigued. You can feel kind of, like some of your symptoms that you may have been experiencing might get worse, but they will calm down. This has to do with, number one, bacterial changes in the gut. So there's die off of different bacteria and yeast. When they, as that is changing, that population is changing, they are putting out different cellular chemicals and things like that the body has to clean up. Some of those are more inflammatory. So that's why you can see kind of this tick up in inflammation. So, but that will improve as you move through it. And then you'll get to a place where, you're feeling better, lighter, improved energy, better sleep, all the things that we, that help us to recognize and feel better. And then when we reintroduce, like I said before, we may find that we have some level of reactivity, and that's good information for us to know. And we then eliminate it, and we kind of get back to baseline, and then we kind of like keep going. So the whole point of this is just that this is an educational tool to really understand what works best for everybody's different biology and their immune system. So who is this for everybody, or who is this not for? I would say anybody who is on medication that needs to be adjusted. So diabetes, high blood pressure, any kind of cardiac issues, really should be working with a practitioner one-on-one to oversee what's going on here. If you have a history of an eating disorder, the idea of restriction in terms of what we're doing for a 3-week period of time can be very triggering. And I always encourage people who have had a history of disordered eating to work one-on-one with somebody to really try to identify and understand what their symptoms are, what they're trying to achieve, and how best to do that without triggering a whole host of an emotional response to something like this, because we don't want this concept of restriction. As you mentioned before, it can have a real impact on our mental health. And so we definitely want to be as supportive as possible. And there are ways to get benefits for understanding, food sensitivities and how to heal your gut without doing this in quite this way. So anybody who has a history of that, I really encourage them to work one-on-one with a dietitian or with a medical practitioner who has a really strong sensitivity to that. Because there are lots of caveats that go along with that. And then anybody who is has a low weight, maybe unstable, highly fatigued, anybody who has a lot of medical symptoms that they're working on with their doctor, they really need to have some observation and handholding and some support around trying to identify that if we're going to use this type of a tool. They may not be at a place to use a tool like this at that point.
Yeah. Good to know.
Yeah,
definitely.
So I am currently in the preparation phase of offering an elimination diet. I'm partnering with a really good friend of mine that we went to residency together, and we are joining to lead a food elimination diet coming up in April. So I'm getting really excited about that. It's always fun to do things in a group. I think we have a slide here that talks about the benefits.
Everything we've been talking about is going to be included in this time together.
Yeah, we're going to be going through as a group all of those phases and stages of something like this.
What were the dates again? It says 1st of April. Let's go back. 1st of April till the 14th of May. And that includes the reintroduction and planning for the future and everything. So
everything. Yeah, that includes everything. And you're not able to, in that period of time, reintroduce all the foods, but you get all the tools, you get all of the handouts to kind of help you do that so that you have a really clear understanding of what you're doing. And there's a lot of time dedicated to, okay, you made it here, right? What does that mean for you in your future? Or if you didn't get the results that you were hoping for, how does that help us support you to get you to the right person that can facilitate going deeper and, you know, figuring out if there are other things that are part of that root cause that can be addressed for you. So this is really a fantastic way of like leaning in and trying to figure out, you know, how, you know, if you feel like you do have some health issues that you want to work on, this is a wonderful way of doing that first step to try to, you know, lean in to see how much of it is food, how much control do you actually have of it. And then if you need to get further support and medical care, we can help get you in the right direction based on what we've seen or what we've talked about during our time together. You know, what would be a good person for you to consider seeing for that.
Okay. Amazing. And you were just about to tell us the benefits of doing that with a group.
Yeah. So the benefits of doing it in a group, even if it's now, obviously under our program, we're both doctors. So, you know, you're kind of being guided by 2 doctors who've led hundreds of people through the process, who kind of really know the ins and outs of all this stuff. I, you know, before I started doing this as a doctor, I mean, I did it with a group of friends, right? So just the idea of doing it in a group creates this kind of support, this baseline support. You know, you can text each other during the day. You can, you know, how did you do this? Which recipe did you like? You know, should we do like, I have like a make and take group. Should we do a make and take? Should we cook together and then split it? You know, that type of thing. So I've done that with friends when I've tried different types of diets, like different types of like fasting mimicking diets or things like that. And it's so helpful to have that check-in every day. Like, how's it going? Like, I did a fasting mimicking diet and like, you know, it was like the first 2 days I was like, are you pooping? Because I'm not pooping. Right? Like, even having someone you can ask that question to makes you feel more committed to like moving through it. And it's amazing the connections that you get when you're doing stuff like this with a group and people. So, you know, we always offer, you know, 1 to 2 group meetings because I'm joining with a friend of mine. She's going to offer a support group on Monday evenings. I'm going to offer one on Thursday midday, Eastern Standard Time, you know, having some either like a private Facebook group, or we're going to try to do it on the network here, Mighty Networks, just so people can communicate and reach out and ask questions, that there's always somebody there to kind of help support you, cheer you on, you know, help address things. If you're feeling really like your cravings are really intense, how are you going to manage that? What else can we do to help support you? You know, all these things come up. So you had mentioned before, what if, you know, someone feels like they are starting and then on day 3, it kind of like the wheels fall off, you know? This is a great way to give yourself support and have like your own kind of fan club, because, you know, we can know in our brain, like, I'm doing this with a whole group of everybody feels this way. I'm not alone in feeling this way.
Yeah.
And so that's why I like doing it in a group, just because of those connections that get made. And you learn about like different recipes and what people are doing, and you pick up different tips and
make friends.
You make friends. Exactly. So it's super fun.
Amazing. I can't wait to start. I'm going to actually, I am in the preparation phase still, because I realized going in head first was not for me. I didn't think about it. I thought, oh, you know, I've been preparing mentally for ages, but not physically, Penny. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. But thank you so much for just covering everything so perfectly today and making it really digestible as well. Excuse the pun, because because I think what a lot of people will find watching this back is just how a topic that has kind of gone over their head is just so accessible now, hearing the way that you speak about it. And I think that's so helpful. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is something I feel so passionate about, because I feel like people have so much power within themselves to help shift that feeling of wellness. And this is one of those tools, by making those choices and learning about your personal health and your personal body, about how it responds to food and how you can support yourself. It's so exciting, because I want people to feel like, if they're not feeling well, that they have tools available to them. They don't always have to, seek out a specialist and seek out this and seek out medication. Like, there's so many ways that we can teach ourselves how to be our own best healer. And this is one of those tools. And that's why I love sharing this information. So happy to do it again. Happy to answer any questions that may come up.
Yeah.
This is just so great.
Now everyone can see us a little bit closer up.
That's why, I thought that would be better.
Exactly. And yeah, I really appreciate all of the encouragement you've given, because I know for a fact, and again, not just because of the community of people that I know this will be helpful for, but for the people that have directly asked me questions about it. And I know for me, how I felt, and I can only imagine for people that have never tried this before and tasted how good it is, not just the food, but the benefits, which I have, and I still struggle to stick to it. Yeah. So for people that haven't, I think your encouragement and empowerment is just so needed, and so helpful. So I am going to be sharing this, and I'm going to share information on how people can sign up to your elimination diet that you're doing with, I was going to say Dr. Kristann, because your names are similar, but it's Dr.
They're similar, Dr. Kristann.
Kristann, yeah.
Fantastic.
And so that people can join and sign up as well. And I think it's it will be good to meet people and just see when you hear that someone's struggling with something like you are, it just also, like you said, just normalizes it. And then you just have to push. The thing about having cravings at the beginning as well is just, you feel like, oh, I'm never going to be able to do this. But when you hear that the cravings are happening because you're doing this, it's easier to through.
It's easier to know, like, okay, this isn't like I'm making myself worse, I'm making myself better. This is just what happens when we start doing that. Exactly. And what I'm so excited about, because we're doing it together, I'm doing it with Dr. Kristann, and I'm doing mine, is that we are sharing all of our educational material and all of the support groups. So she's leading more omnivore-based, like meat-based elimination diet, and I'm doing a whole foods plant-based diet. So you can, and that's the thing, you can be part of both groups. It isn't as if you have to stay with one or the other. We're supporting everybody doing it all however they want to. I just have had, so many people have asked me about, okay, how do I do it? I'm vegetarian, or how do I do it? I'm vegan. And so I just came up, I finally, this is the first year I was like, you know what? I'm just offering a plant-based version, because it gives people a landing spot who have tried that and feel like that's for them, or people who are interested, like, oh my God, I always wanted to go plant-based. People talk about it all the time, but it's confusing to me and I don't understand how to make sure I get what I need. And there are some nuances to that. From being a vegan, there's some nuances to being the best version of yourself, while eating all plants.
Yeah, exactly. And that's who I think my higher self is, because I'm not vegan at the moment, but I will be by the time this year ends, hopefully. And this is my way to start. So thank you so much. What I will do as well is I will, I'll say it now, but I'll also type it up, is if anybody has any questions, send them in, because before the 1st of April, we'll do a Q&A.
Absolutely.
Whether it's a live one where people can attend, or we just take all your questions in, answer them like this, and then share that video. We want to make sure that, you've got everything you need. So thank you.
I would love that. Just have people send in whatever questions or concerns they have, and we can just, and we can just work through them and answer them. Would love to give people information about that.
Definitely. Because I thought I answered some like ones that people might think of as well, but everyone's going to have their own. So We look
Excellent.
forward to hearing the questions, and I look forward to everything ahead. Thank you so much again for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's been a joy. We'll speak to everyone soon.
Everyone soon. Bye.